Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, depending on where in the world you are joining us today. Welcome to today's episode of the PivotCast. I'm your host, Sarah the Pivoter. Here on the PivotCast, I interview super rad humans from all walks of life doing epic things from around the world. This is a platform to share their voice and their story with you. So, in today's episode of the PivotCast, we're going to hear some super rad ideas from a great friend of mine, Kathleen. Now, we've only just recently connected. However, we became fast friends, and almost everything that we were saying to each other was the me too following short after. So, in today's episode, Kathleen and I are going to be talking about the power of appreciative inquiry and how it can help us to pivot into a positive space as we pivot into these different areas of our lives, as we're going through very transitional and impact and with the change in our lives, that point of impact. Where are we going next? How do we use appreciative inquiry to help us with this space? So, the title of today's episode was inspired by one of Kathleen's favorite poems from J.R.R. Tolkien, which is very much in line with one of my favorite poems by Robert Frost, Nothing Gold Can Stay. So, today we're going to be diving into just what is appreciative inquiry and how we can use it to pivot our perspective as we're going through pivots in our lives, and inspiration for her choice with this poem. We also will learn how different tools of self-compassion can aid us in our journeys, because this is how we stay sustainable in our ever-evolving quest for success. Kathleen is the founder of Bridges of Peace and the host of Co-Creating Peace Weekly podcast, which is about conscious communication and conflict transformation, and is available on all podcast providers. Here's a little hint. We've done a podcast which recently just dropped as well, so that link will be shared with you, and she will be sharing more information after our interview. She provides meeting facilitation, conflict resolution, communication coaching, and professional and personal development training services across the US and around the world. Kathleen also serves on the board of directors at International Institute for Global Leadership, and her work is focused on bringing seemingly discordant voices together in collaboration to produce wisdom, growth, and harmony so that we can have the greatest number of needs being met for the greatest number of individuals. So it is with my great pleasure to bring on our guest today, Kathleen. Kathleen, thank you for being here with me today.
Thank you for having me, Sarah. I am just delighted to be with you in this moment and every moment possible. Thank you.
Thank you. It's my pleasure as well. And I am so excited when you sent me that email about the topic that you wanted to speak about and the title.
Mhm.
I just got goosebumps because it was so in line with a lot of the things that I talk about on a regular basis. Can you tell us a little bit more about the poem I mentioned in the intro, and all that is gold does not glitter?
Yes, and J.R.R. Tolkien is one of my favorite authors and poets, and some of his poems are rather obscure because we're more
Mhm.
familiar with his books, the Hobbit series and so forth.
Right.
But this poem goes like this: All that is gold does not glitter. Not all those who wander are lost. The old that grows strong does not wither. Deep roots are not touched by the frost. From the ashes a fire shall be woken, a light from the shadow shall spring. Renewed will be blade that was broken, and the crownless again shall be king. And to me, every line of this poem could be a whole in-depth conversation in and of itself. But so much of it to me talks about that pivot point, talks
Mm.
about when we recognize that the gold in our life may not glitter and yet it is still there and we need to look for it.
Mm.
And when we do, all things are possible. And we have the opportunity then to shift and pivot into that place where we belong. And so that's what, and it's perfect, of course, for appreciative inquiry, because appreciative inquiry is about looking for the gold, even though it does not glitter in our lives and in the people in our lives.
Mm. I love that. And that's very powerful because a lot of us are looking for the sparkle or looking for the very like in your face, this is success, this is joy, this is fulfillment. And it's often in those quieter moments where we pause and we reflect that we actually realize that that's not what it is. When we get there, we're kind of overwhelmed by the flashing lights and go, "Oh, this is not what I thought it was going to be. Get me out." Right. So, how can we use appreciative inquiry to help us to start to find this gold that is already in our lives?
Well, one of the challenges that we face in our psychology is that we have a tendency to focus a lot of attention on what is not working.
Mhm.
And especially when we're having difficulty with a situation or with a person, we give a lot of attention to what's not working, what's in the shadows. And, often we think that we need to focus on that in order to fix it.
Yes.
And what ends up happening is that we fall into this phenomenon called confirmation bias,
Mm.
which is where we have a belief. We believe that this is wrong. We believe that this doesn't work. We believe this person is bad. And we look for all the evidence to confirm that bias, as opposed to saying, hang on a second, without negating that which troubles us, where is the gold? What are the things that I can appreciate about this person, about this situation, and how can I harvest that to
Mm.
move forward in a better way in this situation or with this person? And so the practice of appreciative inquiry actually comes from a branch of positive psychology, and I just love positive psychology.
Me too.
Yeah, help us move forward in the light, right?
Yes.
And it has 5 components, and the 5 components are define, discover, dream, design, and destiny.
Mm.
And so defining is, what is the focus of my appreciative inquiry in this moment? That's the define. The discover is, what is it in that focus that I have in this moment? What is it that I can really appreciate? That's the discover, looking for what brings joy. And then the dream is understanding what I appreciate, what's possible from there. And then the design is, from those possibilities, what do I want to create?
Mm.
And then once we've defined that, then we go to the destiny phase, which is manifesting what we want to create. And that to me is the pivot point.
Mm, I love that. And I love the alliteration with all the D's as well. I'm a big fan of that. Um, and, I always use the phrase live your life by design, not by default.
Nice.
And in order to design your life, you have to actually discover how you want to define it.
Mhm.
What are your dreams? And so often we don't allow ourselves to dream. We're too busy working, right? We're too busy working hard. And as you said, looking at all the things that are not working right. And so where our attention goes, energy flows. We
Mhm.
can't get to the later stages if we don't give ourselves permission to sit in that discovery phase.
Exactly so, exactly so. And I have used appreciative inquiry in so many ways in my life, but one of the biggest ways I've used it professionally is in mediation with individuals, where they are so focused on the challenges they face with one another or what they don't like about one another or the situation that they then say, nothing is possible. This
Right.
is so bad, nothing is possible. It's like a slam door,
Yes.
and for the other person, it's like the door being slammed in their face. And so, again, without negating necessarily what's not working, but putting that to the side a little bit and shifting the focus to what it does work. Why is this person in my life? What do I have to grow from, gain from it from in this person? What are their attributes? What are their gifts? What gold do they bring into my life? And then using that perspective to kind of balance out that which isn't working. And
Mm.
then again, going from that define and discover phase into, what, based on what we understand, we appreciate about each other, what do we want to co-create? How
Yeah.
do we move forward together? And it's made such a difference in the conflicts that I've mediated. It's made such a difference in my own life when I've been troubled about someone. It's possibilities consciousness.
Mm.
And
I love
and without possibilities consciousness, we fall into the shadow and we feel trapped in corners and like doors are slammed in our face. We need that possibilities consciousness.
I love that phrase. I've not heard that used before. And is such a beautiful space to play in because we have this dichotomy, right? And we have the opportunity to just take a step forward and be in the light, come out of the shadows. And yet, because we're scared, we stay there. It feels more comfortable in the dark. And
Mhm.
as you said, we're focusing on what we don't have. So I always like to draw that. And this is something I show people all the time. Most
Ah.
people are looking at the whole instead of the donut. But if
Ah.
I hand you a donut, you don't look at the hole.
No.
You just are excited that you have a donut. And I mean, you know what? It's very handy because you can put your finger in it and you can eat it and walk around and not get, sticky fingers. So there's a purpose for everything. And I
Right?
really love how it's this invitation to be curious and
Mhm.
connect through that curiosity.
Mhm. Yes, and when we do that, when we have that curiosity and we connect through that curiosity and we connect based on the positive, that's where that line in the poem, "A light from the shadows shall spring,"
Mm.
right? Yeah, yeah, and that can guide us into such beautiful places.
Absolutely. And I'm just thinking that there are so many applications for this because, let's take a home example. We come home, we're tired, and our partner maybe hasn't done the dishes, right? And we get
Mhm.
really frustrated. And so we start to use language like you never,
Right,
you
yes,
always, right?
yes.
And so we make it an absolute. And
Mhm,
and to use your example, it's like slamming the door in their face or slapping them across the face when we say
mhm,
things like this. And
mhm,
of course, I mean, maybe they just walked in the door too, right? We don't have all of the story. So what do? We fill in the blanks based on our
mhm.
previous experience, based on our assumption. And so this is now that opportunity to take a breath and say, okay, well, what do I appreciate about this person? And what do they bring to my life? You could spend all your energy focusing on the fact that there's dishes on the sink, or you could focus on the fact that maybe there's a hot meal on the table waiting for you. So, we can divert and pivot our attention to the things that are there that we do desire, that we do enjoy.
Exactly, that this person is in our life, that they are there with us in this moment, that they're there to greet us when we're tired, and even though the dishes may not be done, there's so much there to appreciate. And, one of the things that I have noticed about human beings is that we have a tendency to want to do that which we are acknowledged and appreciated for. And
Yes.
so when we say to our partner in that moment, I am so glad to see you. It is so nice to have you right here with me and feeling the love that I feel for you. Then all of a sudden they feel a little bit bigger. They feel valued. They feel acknowledged and they want to be with us more. And
Right.
if we love them, we want that too. Right? And so there's just and or even if the dishes aren't done, to say, "Thank you so much for cooking. I am starving, and I really appreciate the way you nurture me." And then they
Yes,
wanna nurture us more, right?
absolutely.
Yeah.
And this really ties into as well, that positive reinforcement.
Mhm.
It's the same thing, when you have children, when you have a puppy and you're potty training, right? If
Mhm.
you just punish them because they didn't do what you wanted to do, they don't feel good, and then it doesn't really work, and both parties are frustrated. But if you praise them and give them positive reinforcement when they do it correctly, they want to do
Mhm.
it again.
Exactly.
Because, our brains, take it back to science, it releases dopamine. And so
Exactly.
we're
Yes.
getting the chemicals that tell us, hey, that was good, do it again because it feels good. And then we're motivated. That's also our drive. So, as you said, you know, this is so important, praising those behaviors that we want more of, cultivating that desire rather than running away from the pain. And also to make, in the workplace, there's
Mhm.
that phrase, praise in public, punish in private,
Right. Mhm.
right? And it's the same thing. You don't want to belittle someone in front of others because that would really deflate them.
Right.
And you using appreciative inquiry can open the door to understand at a deeper level what is going on with your staff members.
Exactly, and even when someone, quote, unquote, "fails at something," to acknowledge them for their effort to say thank you so much for the effort that you put into this. I see how hard you tried, and I know that the next time you'll be able to get it spot on. Just keep on giving it that great effort, right? And then they want to try again, and they
Right.
want to do it better the next time, rather than saying, holy cow, you blew it again.
Right.
And that, and thinking about it from an energetic level, when we give that acknowledgement, when we give that praise, we're actually, in my perspective, sending cords of light from
Mm,
our soul to that person's soul. We're validating their beingness.
yes.
And when we do that appreciation, when we look inside ourselves and say, what do I appreciate? And then we share it with that person. And then we say, what can we co-create together based on what we appreciate about each other? We're strengthening those cords of light between ourselves and another person. Where,
Mhm.
of course, when we do the opposite, we're fracturing, we're fraying those cords, we're fraying that relationship. And that's when more shadow comes in and things can fall apart. And I
Mm.
so prefer to pivot to the positive.
Absolutely. And I love that analogy because it's really visceral to think about a string or piece of thread.
Mhm,
And that thread has the cords that create it, right? And if you think about yarn, you can really visualize it in a thicker context.
mhm,
And if that gets frayed, like let's say it's hanging over the edge of something and is moving back and forth, right? And it will eventually fray and then tear. It's not as strong. And that's exactly what is happening. And yesterday I was a guest on a panel grappling with the gray, and our host was saying that, when he was in school, he still remembers getting the most improved player award.
ah,
And because we were talking about participation trophies and this type of culture that's developed. And he said, I knew I was never going to be MVP. That wasn't, I wasn't very skilled in the sport, but to get this award to show how it was noticed, how much I had improved because I worked so hard, and to have that recognized, he's like, it meant the world to me. And I said, well, and here you are 40 years later, still talking about it.
mhm,
It was so
exactly,
powerful.
exactly. So that which we are acknowledged for, we
Yeah.
want to perpetuate. So
Yes.
true.
And to use, I mean, that word perpetuate, I put up something today talking about what we tolerate, we perpetuate. And so I think that this also extends beyond the appreciative inquiry from ourselves. But if the people around us are belittling and pivoting to the negative rather than the positive, we also have a responsibility to set up the environment for success. So, how can we communicate that the importance, the value of this to our family members, to our colleagues, to our team, so that we can go on this journey of seeing each other and connecting at a deeper level together, rather than thinking, oh well, that's not my problem because it wasn't directed at me.
Right.
Right.
So true. Mhm. Yeah.
So I know you've used appreciative inquiry a lot in mediation. Can you give us some other examples where you might have used that in the corporate setting, for example, where you had a situation that once appreciative inquiry was introduced, it was really able to pivot the entire outcome.
Well, one example that comes to my mind, one of the things that I'm often brought in to do is to coach people on their leadership and communication skills. I do a lot of communication coaching in the business and corporate setting. And so often, leaders who are maybe not fully developed, fully matured as leaders, don't necessarily remember the humanity in the people that they lead. They see the people that they lead as a role, as a function, right?
Right.
And so they don't necessarily approach those people with compassion or with clear communication, making sure they understand and so forth. And so then when that person doesn't understand because they weren't communicated with clearly, they weren't developed, they weren't nurtured, then the leader becomes upset with them and critical of them, and sometimes even demeans them. And so in the coaching process, I say, okay, you have a lot of attention. You've gotten real clear on what it is about this person that's not suiting you, not meeting your needs. And you've told them that. And you've noticed as you're telling me that their work is declining. The more you tell them that, the more their quality of work is declining. What are you noticing about that? And most of the time they'll say, well, that they just continue to suck and it gets worse. And
Right.
I'll say, so putting that aside for just a minute, just taking a look at what is it about that person that you really appreciate? What are their skills? What are the talents you've seen? Why did you bring them onto the team in the first place? What assets, what benefits do you see in them? And ask them to really focus on it, look at it, make that list. That's beginning the appreciative inquiry process. And then saying, all right, you've pointed out where there are areas in which they failed, in which their skills are weak, and looking at where their skills are strong, where might you redirect your energy toward them and their energy toward their work? Toward based on what is strong in them, what their strengths are,
Right.
and how can you validate and acknowledge that? And they'll often, not want to even try that. That's too touchy-feely and so forth. And I'll say, well, okay, so right now you're in WIIFM consciousness. What's in it for me? And
Right.
I'll say, I'll tell you what's in it for you, that that person will blossom when you point out to them what you appreciate about them, when you
Mm,
direct their energy toward where their skills are, find someone else to do those tasks in which they are not strong, or help them develop that into a strength. But in the meanwhile, if you want to have them flourish, you need to look for and acknowledge every single thing about them that you appreciate, including their effort, even if their effort led to failure. They tried, acknowledge that. And so many times I have seen those leaders shift, especially when they start that first phase, that discovery phase, and all of a sudden they recognize, wow, this is a human being. And
mm,
maybe, so often people in my generation have a hard time with people in your generation because holy cow, you've got all these new ideas and I'm going steady here. I've been coasting for a lot of years with what I know, and now you're throwing me these curveballs.
right.
And and yet, if we shift our focus to what do we appreciate, holy cow, the empowerment that there is in technology, if only we will learn it. The empowerment that there is and the wisdom that there is in the new young ideas and a different frame of reference, there's so much to appreciate. And so when I work with teams that have multi generations in them, I'm inviting them to stop and appreciate what each generation brings to the
Mm,
table. Those in my generation from the perspective of your generation, and vice versa. And when we do that, and when teams do that, all of a sudden they blossom in such beautiful and strong ways. It
yeah.
takes appreciative inquiry.
I really, really love that. It reminds me of this story I read the other day where someone had, they just moved to this town and they donated a bunch of money to the library. And so they went in and they felt that they were not treated well or accordingly to, what they expected. And so
Those
they called
expectations.
to make a complaint.
Uh-huh.
And the next time they came in, the librarian was like, had book recommendations ready for them and was like, really attentive. And so the woman called back and said, "Oh, did you tell her how horrible our experience was? That's why, we're very impressed this time." But the woman, the manager said, "No, actually, I told her that you would really appreciate her book recommendations because you thought that she would do very well in providing this service." And so this woman leapt to the occasion and rose and did what she, loved and connected, and instead, imagine if she had been told that she had failed and that she was terrible and these people had a horrible experience. She would have been really meek and mild, most likely the next time they came in, maybe perhaps even hid, not gone out to meet them, let somebody else greet them.
Yes.
And it was just like the woman's experience, she was so dumbfounded, but she said she learned a valuable lesson that day in, again, that humanity element. How do we come off of that high horse and just connect with the human rather than the role or what the expectation is?
Yes, and that's a beautiful story. I just love that, and I appreciate that you brought in that expectation piece because it's often when we have rigid expectations and things that happen fall outside of our expectations that we don't appreciate the goodness in what happened because it fell outside of our expectations. And to have that manager, reframe the situation in the way that they did, and then how that changed the whole dynamic, because all of a sudden somebody was saying, "Oh, there's something that I have to offer. Let me offer it. Let me bring myself the joy of offering it and bring them the joy of receiving it." And boom, there was a pivot. It's beautiful.
Exactly. Exactly. And, as we go through major changes in our lives as well, whether that's, a career change, a move, anything that means a new routine, means something different, what happens? Our expectations need to change. We have to
Mhm.
be more fluid. We
Mm.
have to remove expectation and, create and design what we want to happen next. We can't expect that if we move from, Hawaii to Alaska, that we will have the same routines and that the
Mm.
days look the same. Of course, but that's a
Mhm.
very extreme example.
Right.
Yet when we go into a new job, maybe it's even not even a manager role yet, it's just an adjacent job. We expect it's the same. And then we
Mhm.
get frustrated when it's different. So using appreciative inquiry is a very powerful tool to help us pivot through these changes and realize what is working so that we can put our attention there instead.
Exactly so, and, right along those lines where another way I've used positive psychology and appreciative inquiry in very powerful ways in my own life is those mornings when I wake up singing the blues. And, maybe I had a bad dream, maybe something wasn't quite right in the way that I wake up, and
Mhm.
I'm depressed, right? And I can dive right on in there, and I can just go into all the things that are wrong, or I can stop for a minute, and I have right by my bed, I have this chalkboard that says at the top, "I am thankful for."
Mhm.
And I start writing down the things that I'm appreciating. I am grateful that I woke up. I am grateful that I woke up able-bodied. I am grateful for so many things, that my brain still functions, my body still functions, that it's a beautiful day, that I am free, that, there's so many things to be grateful for. And when I start appreciating what's the blessings are in my life, then all of a sudden everything shifts and a light from the shadow springs, and I can go about my day being grateful for so many things because I took a moment to do that appreciative inquiry about my own life in that moment.
And
Yeah.
I like that because it's a very good example. A lot of us, this just happened to me the other day. I woke up and, I was just grumpy and just grouchy and didn't really want to interact with anyone and nothing felt good. But when I asked myself, well, how would I rather feel?
Mm, right.
This was a better question. And then I was able to say, okay, well, I'd rather feel joyful. Okay, what's going to bring me some joy? And then I was able to go and do that activity and then be grateful for the fact that I could have it. And so this is a really beautiful way that we can start to shift our own mindsets. I think a lot of us, unfortunately, have this mindset of, or this attitude, this belief that it will happen or it will be fixed for me or it's not my problem, it's society's problem. And so this then allows us to be the creator of our own life and create the change. It's be the change you wish to see in the world. What are you waiting for? We don't
Right.
have to wait for someone else to do it for us or to hand it to us. We can simply go and create it ourselves.
Exactly. Sometimes it's be the change you wish in the moment.
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
exactly so. Yeah.
And I think that's even better way to say it because sometimes that's really overwhelming, like, oh, the responsibility. If I change this, then I have to change the world. It's no, at this moment, how can you change something for yourself, for your own experience?
Mhm.
And it's not selfish because when you are radiating, when you're in a better energetic space, everyone else around you gets that ripple effect.
Right.
We know that this has an impact. If you walk in the room and the boss is really grumpy, like throwing the stapler, then we know, oh, okay, and everyone's really quiet and nobody wants to speak up. The creative ideas just completely stop flowing. But if instead that person is making eye contact and smiling, then they're encouraged to share and to connect and be open, right? And so it's really up to us as individuals to claim that power back so that we
Mm.
can appreciate what we do have, appreciate the moments that we are in, and then use that to fuel us to pivot into the new directions.
So true, and so much of that touches on setting the tone. If for the moment, for the interaction, for our reality. And as you're saying, it is up to us to be the creator of our own reality, and we can create that positive reality by remembering and always looking for what do we appreciate? Where is the gold here, even though it may not glitter?
I love this so much. And Lester was with us live. You made some comments about how powerful it is, and gratitude can really change things. And his story is amazing. I'll be having him as a guest on the PivotCast in the future as well. But it's really about finding that gold and understanding. Redefining what is
Mm.
your experience of gold. It doesn't have to always glitter. Maybe sometimes it still does, but it doesn't
Mhm.
have to all the time.
No, it doesn't, and sometimes it's the gold that's wrapped around a chocolate coin, and
Mm,
right?
yes.
And it has all kinds of wonderful meanings, and so yes, it's not about the glitter, it's about the value.
Yeah. That's beautiful. It's so powerful. And Kathleen, thank you so much for being my guest today and bringing this really important tool to us, because it's important that people understand that this can be used not just in your personal lives, but as a very powerful tool in business to motivate teams, to pivot your own career as you go up the ladder and you become management, as you decide to go and create something of impact like you have with Bridges of Peace. These are the tools that allow you to make those possible.
Exactly so, and I have been so delighted to be here with you today, Sarah, and with all of your listeners. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share my thoughts.
Thank you. And can you tell our listeners as well a little bit more about your podcast and where they could find you if they'd like to reach out and connect?
You bet. So, my podcast is Co-Creating Peace. It's a 30-minute weekly podcast. It's all about conscious communication and conflict transformation. How do we, as I put it, talk nice to one another and play well together? And there's lots of tools and ideas. I have lots of wonderful guests, including dear Sarah, to share their thoughts and their wisdom. And I also have letters from listeners about some of the challenges they face and the advice that I've given them. And that podcast is available on every podcast channel. It can also be found on the podcast page of my website, which is bridgesofpeace.com. And that's also how you can contact me and let me know how I can be of service and co-create better realities with you. So I hope to hear from each and every one of you who's listening in this moment.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And I will definitely be sharing the link to the podcast episode that we did as well. And I've put this up on the screen here so people can very easily see your information and reach out. I love what you're doing in the world. And thank you so much for being my guest today.
Thank you, Sarah.
For all of our listeners, thank you for joining us live and for watching us after the fact. If you have any questions, please just tag us so that we can see them and get back to you. And remember that real pivoters are human beings just like me and you. All it takes is the choice to go out and do something different. So go out and do something that's going to allow you to sparkle, even if it might not be in an outright way. Thank you for being with us, and we'll see you soon.